All right, we are live.
Okay, so hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. We are now going to start putting it together, putting this thing together and rigging a character. Although there are a few things that we're going to need to do beyond beyond the leg that I wasn't really thinking about last time. So we may or may not get a character like fully put together today. We'll see. But we're getting pretty close. Uh, But before we do that, let's see. Do we have any other things we want to talk about in terms of notional pipe stuff? I can sort of mention that we're making some really interesting progress with ephemeral stuff that I hope we'll be able to show very, very soon. Multi-pose editing, and it's very exciting. It's getting stuff much closer to the way I envision this system should work than the way it's worked in the past. And people, have been pretty excited about what we've shown so far, but it was always like a fraction of what I think it could be, right? Like the utility for the speed of animation that you could have. And interestingly, and this seemed to happen in part in the switch to Python 3, things have gotten fast enough that implementing some of the things that we wanted to implement for a long time, but we thought were probably going to be too slow, possibly aren't too slow. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, I think we have some fairly straightforward stuff that we can do that would make it faster as
Oh
well.
yes, absolutely. Like we've always known that.
Yeah,
But we always thought that we'd have to wait until we had done even further optimization to try any of this new stuff, and that's not true. Like we can do it right now, so I'm pretty excited about that. But no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we can do to make it a lot faster, and faster by like an extremely large amount, actually.
yeah, by an order of
Like
magnitude.
we know what needs to be done, but it's not something we've gotten to yet in that regard. It's already much faster than it used to be. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not going to make any promises about this, but I can see the ephemeral system actually being like available in 2023.
It could easily happen, yes.
Yeah.
Now, like you say, it's very hard for us to predict, like,
It depends very much on on what else is happening
on
and
what
what
else
else
is
is
going
going
on, and
on.
that has always
Yeah,
been our problem, actually, which is that we're juggling a lot of different stuff, right?
yeah.
We've got Contour out, and we're doing support for it, and all of the other things. Plus, we have jobs.
Continued
Plus, like,
development.
like there's
Yeah.
plus we want to make keep pushing the ephemeral system forward, and keep and we're adding new features to Contour. Like
Yeah.
we have a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so that's
I mean, and
basically,
about
yeah.
Contour, it should be mentioned that things have been going pretty well, like on the
Hmm.
code side of all of this componentized stuff, to the point that I don't think like that the non-rig stuff is going to be as much. Yeah, I was a little worried that that might be the bottleneck, that
Yeah.
some of the Maya coding might be, but I think we're far enough now that we know that it's not going to be a
Yeah,
serious one.
yeah.
So
Like once we really get the body plan together, there's still going to be so we want like a different visualization for the like we don't want the guides to just be locators, right? But we've done most of the work to make that happen. Like we've done some tests, and it does what it
yeah,
needs to do.
it's a little tricky in VP2 to get everything that we want, which is we want our stuff to always draw on top, but we want it to have a proper drawing order between our own shapes.
Yeah,
And that actually turns out to be harder to do in VP2 than you might think. But we wrote some custom shaders that basically do what we want.
yeah,
So that's good. And yeah, I think we're gonna have 1.1 of Contour out in the pretty near future with the body plans. I think, my guess, again, I don't like to make promises about dates because who knows what actually happens, but my guess is that it's on the order of within the month.
yeah. I could easily see that being the case. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, and by within the month, I think if you're talking about like actually getting it fully together, probably not this month because it's already the 24th. But
Well, I mean, right. I don't mean this month. I mean within a month
yes, I see what you mean. Within a month, yeah,
of now.
absolutely. I think that could easily happen. Um,
Yeah.
the but let's see.
And
I
if it
also
doesn't, if it isn't in 30 days, it will be very close to that, I
sure,
think.
yeah, yeah. It's not going
Could be
to take
six,
that
could
much
be
longer.
6 weeks, but I don't think it will be.
Yeah. So let's see. Speaking of which, like, let's get back to our componentized stuff. So I do have to note something here. And this has been a bit of a recurring thing in our, sort of unit of componentized this series of componentized streams, which is, oh look, I actually did forget another important thing, right? um which is a little embarrassing, but also in my defense, I've been doing a lot of other stuff at the same time, and I've had a lot less time to prepare than I usually like to have for streams, and that's actually good because, in a sense, I mean, it's not really good for the stream, but very cool things are happening, that have taken up a lot of my time that I can't talk about, basically. But it's very exciting. But the downside to that has been I've often switched off of doing other work, like for TTF, immediately onto streaming without any time to like get my head into the right space. And as a result, like, yeah, I feel like this set of streams has been just like a little scattershot, like a little like kind of all over the place. And hopefully, we can sort of get something together in the future that'll be a little bit better planned, and better structured. Because I feel like this hasn't necessarily been the easiest thing to follow for people. Even though I feel like this idea of components and the idea and the structure of how they go together, which may maybe start to become a little more clear now that I'm going to start, inserting these into a full body plan. I feel that that this is like a really important set of ideas, but it's also a set of ideas that can be hard to get across if you don't have like a very, very clear set of, I don't know, pedagogy, right? Like, if you don't have a very clear like, lesson plan, and sort of in a sense, I mean, not lesson plan, it's not school, but like way of presenting the information, which I did not really have and still don't. But regardless, here's the thing I forgot about. Anyone who has read the Contour manual or seen a lot of the videos that we've put out about Contour knows that there's this really important thing where you have spline overshoot. And I kind of forgot about that when I was putting the leg together, just like I forgot about it on the bottom. Which just goes to show that, like, I don't necessarily remember my own stuff sometimes. So I went ahead and added that outside the stream, because it's fairly straightforward. I mean, it's not really different from how the way that I put the leg together that was originally streamed, just with an additional input. So I did not feel like it was worth on the stream, sort of like sitting there and like making this extra thing, right? But I do think that there's actually an interesting opportunity here to show off something about the componentized system that we weren't really going to touch on that much, actually, otherwise, which is how you pass data from one component to another. So everything we've shown so far has been about passing data from guides into components. And the only context in which we pass data from one component into another has been the anchors or space switches, which they're pretty equivalent in how they work, right? This is going to be a bit of a different case. And here's why. So here I have, this hip overshoot guide, right? However, if I were to keep this being a guide, it would actually cause some issues, right? Which is to say, and again, anyone who's looked at some of the videos that we've done on Contour or read the manual may already sort of have gotten this impression. You're supposed to this thing here. The reason why this exists, right? The reason why there is one up here is that when you have the character's spine, you want this overshoot so you get the nice contour deformation right around the hip. And to do that, you need a spline that runs through it, and you need that spline to actually move around when the character's spine does. And actually, let me, to make this super clear, let me actually load up like Contour Man or something and just show like what this looks like when, what this is supposed to look like. Yeah, let's grab Contour Man for a second. Now, of course, we are not showing the bones at the moment, or rather they've been deleted because of the issues with having them in the scene. For anyone who's not familiar with what that is, and that is a little buried, I think, in the manual, and we maybe should make more of a point of it. At least in some versions of Maya, we have not really tested it thoroughly in every version. Just having custom shape nodes in the scene can be a significant performance hit. So we offer the ability to delete contour shape nodes instead of hiding them, which is what you normally do, like hide joints, right? To delete them and then restore them when you want them back. And so in this case, since they are deleted, it doesn't matter if I show bones, you won't see anything. I need to actually restore them. And then I need to disable the radius indicator because otherwise it's a little hard to see. So it's these things right here, right? Here we have this spline going through. And the reason for that, you can sort of see, here, let me just turn off the IK for a second. You can see why this is if I say lift up the leg like this, right? The nice curvature that you get around this area, which continues to be nice more or less regardless of what I do with the leg, right? You're getting this really nice curvature, which is all coming from contour. That is not, that requires a spline with a bend in it in order for contour to be able to produce that. But if we simply ran the spline up through the bend and then left everything else, alone, then if you say bent the spine like this, you would cease getting that nice deformation because there wouldn't be a spline bending up this way like it is, right? And so there's a really simple way to do this in contour, which I use constantly, and it's enormously effective, which is you run the spline up there, and then you take, whatever represents that control point. In this case, it's this joint socket, and you deform field constrain it to the spine joint. And of course, the deform field constraint deforms any transform node, but in this case, it's the joint socket, as if it were being as if it were being deformed, right? But it's a transform node; it's being transformed instead, which gives you something that matches the curvature it's giving to the mesh. So this is great, and we obviously need that for our componentized stuff too. But if we go back and look at this for a second, how would we do this? Well, the naive approach, as it were. And when I say naive, I want to be clear, I don't actually mean bad, right? This is the same approach I use myself in rigs if I'm just building the rig from scratch. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with a naive approach if it is actually effective and, simple and gets the job done and won't have long-term bad consequences. However, sometimes naive approaches aren't appropriate, right? Naive in this case not meaning, there's no element of contempt there, right? It's simply naive because it is the simple, most obvious solution, which isn't always the right thing, right? So the approach there is you just constrain, you take your contour joint socket, right? And you just deform field constrain it to the spine. And in most cases that's actually perfectly fine, right? But here's why it's not perfectly fine in this case. What we want out of these components, one of the really important concepts that we're trying to approach with the components is that they are interchangeable, right? We could have other kinds of legs in the future, right? And by that I don't mean things like quad legs, because a quad leg would actually have a different, topology in a sense. It would have a different set of inputs and outputs, right? But you could have a leg that worked in some different way. Maybe instead of having conventional IK, it has something more like pseudo K, like we kind of do with the ephemeral system, only less good because that works much better if it's ephemeral, but you can still kind of do it in a normal rig. It's just a leg that works differently. And one of the things about having the componentized system that makes it so flexible is that you can simply swap those out because you have defined inputs and outputs, and therefore the interface to the rest of the rig is uniform. Therefore, anything inside that component can change without breaking the rig in any way. This is, and also it means you just go back to the original file, make any changes, as long as you're not changing inputs and outputs, it'll work, right? You're sort of given this guarantee, which is really, I mean, the degree to which this lets you be flexible about how you rig is really an incredible benefit of this type of system. However, there are some issues with this too. And one of the primary issues that you have is that this kind of ad hoc relationship between things, where you're just I'm just going to make a constraint to something inside the component, is something you need to restrain yourself from doing. Because Maya will not restrain you from doing that. Now, this sort of concept of here's a, I would say here is an entity that performs computation, because of course there's a lot of different kinds of ways of doing this sort of thing in programming, right? that has an explicit interface that other things can interact with, but they can't know what's inside it, right? This is a very, very common thing, but usually your programming language, or maybe not the language itself, but like some aspect of how you've programmed your entities or whatever, will enforce this. It will not let you like go and touch stuff that you're not allowed to touch, and it will maintain that interface as something that is that like that's what you're interacting with. Or in some cases, it's not even a question of it being enforced. Like Python doesn't really enforce stuff like that. You're allowed to screw around with whatever you want, but there are conventions for that, where you're like, oh, I put this underscore in front of the name of a function. That means it's internal. Nobody's allowed to screw around with it unless they really, really, really need to, and they're absolute, and they understand what the consequences are, right?
I mean, and a lot of it comes down to discipline, right? You just have
Right.
the habits of not doing undisciplined things. And I will say that this isn't the case everywhere and with all people. One very common problem in software is that things are coupled that should not be coupled.
Exactly. And it's even more of a problem in Maya because in the case we were talking about with Python, there's this very clear convention, right? Python won't stop you from messing around with that stuff. But you know that if you're calling a function with an underscore outside the module where it appears, you know that you're doing something you probably shouldn't do. And therefore you have that sort of mental check on it, I guess. But of course, simply making an arbitrary like connections between things in any old direction and in any old order and between any given who knows what, like that pretty much is how things work in Maya, and like that is the convention of doing this stuff in Maya, right? And therefore there isn't even like a culture to hold you back, as it were.
Well, the other thing is you don't have nearly as many tools for organizing things in such a way that it's easy to not do that.
Right, exactly. Like in a sense, the componentized system is essentially an attempt to impose that kind of organization on the Maya node graph, which has none of its own. This is why you can't. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
When you need to know things from outside the component, which you do in some cases, like for instance, what are you going to constrain to? Right, this leg is going to have to, you're going to have to constrain the overshoot here, and so you have to have some system for doing that. You have a lot of tools for doing that in programming languages, that kind of thing.
Right.
There's a lot of known patterns for it. So I'm kind of interested because Maya has nothing like that that's really obvious.
Right. Oh, it doesn't. But we do have a pretty clear answer to this question about like how should you do this in a componentized way, and it basically has to do with the interface that we've already established. Because this is what I was saying. Like we've created a situation here in which most of the inputs and outputs. The inputs, sorry. I mean the outputs, there aren't really a lot of outputs in the system we've made here. In a more complex system there might be, right? But like the inputs are all coming in from guides. But they don't have to come from guides. They can come from other parts of the rig. And in this case, they can pretty effectively, without really creating any real issues, come from other components. I.e., the output of another component can go into the input of this component. So in this case, I've got a hip overshoot guide, which I created so that when I was extending, this joint chain upward, I'd have something to sort of work with. I'm now going to delete it because actually it shouldn't be there. This is something that should actually be coming from the spine, not from a guide. I mean, ultimately, a guide will define where that position is, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the spine have a guide for that. The spine assumes, and keeping with the flexibility of the componentized system, the guide doesn't care what that output gets used for. Or rather, the spine doesn't care, right? If you have regular legs, or you have quad legs, or you have weird robot spider legs, like who knows what, right? Like the spine doesn't care. It does know, though, that in order to have legs in the context of Contour, you're kind of supposed to be able to have this spline overshoot. And so it just has the facility to have that any of these possible legs that you could theoretically have could hook into, right? So we are, I think, going to get to setting that up today pretty shortly. Before I do that, though, I wanted to note one thing, which is, so I just deleted that guide, right? This didn't mess up anything in the rig. It just means there's no way of setting the position of this thing right now. So I can still move this thing around, and it actually isn't doing the right thing. And the reason why it's not, that's right, that's why it's not doing the right thing, because this guide was originally, like, arranged to aim at it. So if I put the guide back, right, now it's doing the right thing. Because these guides, like one of the rules we have for the guides and the legs and arms and stuff, is they're supposed to be sort of in a line, right? They're supposed to be, sort of lined up with each other. Of course, once I delete the guide, it doesn't do that anymore. But nothing else about this is wrong, right? As long as that arrangement is preserved, which it can be because of relating guides together, and guides are allowed to talk to each other any way you want, right? It's the components themselves that are not permitted to do that. Basically it's fine to not have an actual guide there in the leg. It's good. This is stuff that's going to come in from the spine. So I'm just going to save this. And before I get to that, though, I'm actually going to start assembling, I think, the body plan. I'm gonna start assembling the body plan a little bit more, because I think that it will help to, it'll help to make some of this stuff a little more clear for me to put together, the other arm and other fingers, and like sort of get some stuff in place first before I start adding the leg and then talking about how the spine talks to the leg. So we have like this really basic thing that we have already put together, and we already set up the relationships that we needed here for the anchors, right? Because the reason why the fingers actually follow the hand around is because of this relationship with anchors. Now, the fingers don't have any spaces. They're straight FK, very, very simple, right? Again, this being the componentized system, you could conceivably have other kinds of fingers in here. You could have fingers that were like IK or something. That'd be totally reasonable. What's going on here? Why is this one finger messed up? I think that probably has to do with the guides. It totally does. I don't know why I had the guides like arranged that way, but apparently I did, and I'm gonna go put them back in a useful place. That was really weird. What did I do here? This one's 180 degrees away. Oh, that's what I did. Right, one of them's aiming at the other, and then I moved them both at once, so, they did some weird behavior. This should be fine. Now that I've... Nope, it's not. Let me make sure these are all correct over here. They totally are. I'm going to do something that is, not really the right thing. Let's just see. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, did I? Haha, yes, I think I see what's going on here. Let me take a look at the finger components and take a look at my inputs. Nope, the side is left, as it should be on the other ones as well. So it isn't just that I had it on the wrong side. I don't really know what's going on with this one, and I don't really want to figure it out right now. It probably has to do with the order that I move these guides around being wrong. I'm just going to get rid of it and put in a new one. Let's see, this one would be the pointer. Gonna remove that. And I'm gonna bring in another. Which, we kind of have to do that right now anyway, because we're about to bring in all the right side ones. I'm going to call this namespace left pointer. I'm going to grab a finger. It will not, of course, be in the right location at first. I don't really care that much about having it be positioned in some exact place, because, of course, this isn't where it would be positioned on an actual character anyway, right? It hardly matters. These things are all going to have to get repositioned in useful finger locations. So it really doesn't matter if they don't line up perfectly. But I do need to hook up its, I need to hook up the, because right now the anchor, of course, is not being affected, and therefore it's not moving around with the hand. I gotta hook that up. That should be very simple to do. do it through the node editor. I have relied on ad hoc Python quite a bit in this series, and I will have to again because sometimes it's too slow to do it otherwise. But I'm going to try to do things that are relatively simple like this. You know, I mean, this is an example. Like, this is exactly what I've been doing. You know, same situation. I'm going to rely on. I'm going to do it in the node editor, so it's a little clearer. Where was I? Oh yeah, I didn't throw the stuff in the appropriate places yet. Components. You may note, by the way, that a few other things changed that aren't really relevant to our streams, like this Contour body plan data now. This all has to do with how it'll actually operate in Contour as a released piece of software. And it's not really all that relevant for, you know, like what we're streaming. It all has to do with like the tooling and how, you know, it gets presented to the user and, you know, applied. Not important for us right now. So yeah, we need inputs. Actually, we need to just get rid of all that stuff because that doesn't matter. And we need oh yeah, it comes in from the spine, of course. We need outputs and inputs from the spine. Not the spine, the arm. Apparently I can't talk today. Let's see, we're going to take the hand. Going to plug that into the anchor. That comes in from the outputs. And we're going to take the hand from the inputs and plug that into anchor offset. This should now produce a situation in which everything works correctly, and indeed it does. Now, I did discuss this earlier on the stream. I'll just do a very, very quick reminder. What's going on here is that because of the fact that all of these things happening internal to the components are in world space, to prevent double transforms, the equivalent parenting of components is actually really the difference between two things, right? And in this case, it's the difference between the input of the arm, which is, you know, the canonical position of the hand, because I can still, of course, you know, change, you know, what the relationship between these are anytime I want. I can move the guides around anytime I want, and the rig will respond properly, which is another, like, really incredibly nice thing, right? But the relationship to those things has to be, is really the difference between the input and the output, i.e. where this thing's canonical position is and where it's been moved to, that essentially produces the parenting effect, if you want to put it that way. And, you know, just to note this, it was a little unclear when it's all in different positions, but yeah, I can change this, the proportions of this at any time and still have those things operate together nicely. Because componentized rigging is actually really, really awesome. Like, you know, this is stuff you cannot do with an auto rigger in a reasonable fashion. All right. Got that working. Let me just check one thing before we move ahead, which is, what did I do with the arm and its space switching? Because the arm has space switches. Character, upper body, shoulder, right? And I don't know if I actually hooked them up. And this would be a good time to do so, because this is actually going to be where we start adding some additional elements, character and upper body controls, which are, of course, pretty important. The character control in this case is your character's root, right? You know, you want to be able to move the root around. You want to be able to move the character around independently of the animation that's in the scene. This is like a totally normal thing to do. But then also usually, and this is actually something that I greatly dislike, or have come to greatly dislike, but in the context of conventional rigging, you really don't have much of a choice, is that there's going to be an upper body control that is basically sort of everything like spine up is going to be parented or attached or anchored, or however you want to put this. It's not really quite the same thing as normal parenting too. And that's so that you can do things like move the entire upper body around. Of course, I don't like this anymore because I want that to be ephemeral, right? I want it to be like, well, sure, you can do that. You just have to be in the right mode to move all those things together. Instead of, you have to be in, you have a special control for that always exists in the scene. But it is what it is. That's what we're going to do. So, let's take a look at what we need to do here. I'm actually going to start by adding the character control. And to set that stuff up, I'm actually going to do something I realize that I haven't done previously, but this will only take a second, which is I'm going to make a component with a single control in it. which probably sounds like a fairly weird thing to do. Most of these components are a lot more complex than that. But actually, in a couple of cases, it's really useful to have a component that literally just has one control in it, so that it can use the component interface to pass data around in this similarly, like, simple, clear way. Perhaps simple is the wrong word, but it's a unified way, right? Everything works the same. And to do that, I'm just going to make one real quick. I'm going to reference in the ARM, so I just look at its structure while I'm doing this. This is going to be called component, because that's how I'm doing this. This is going to be very silly. There's going to be one single guide, but that is actually the correct thing to be happening for, like, the upper body control. Locator. And actually, I think this is worth noting. When we did, for instance, the setup machine TSMG and TSM3, the setup machine 3, we had a concept that was in some ways somewhat componentized, right? I've mentioned this before, I didn't understand what this system could get you in theory, and so we had something that was sort of like in between being componentized and being a conventional auto rigger. But as an example, the upper body control ended up being a special case. And like, that wasn't the end of the world, but it added, you have enough of those things and they just keep adding more complexity. And one of the things about this system that I want to avoid is special cases, which is why I'm going ahead and making a component type with a single control in it. So I'm going to call this guide control. I don't know. I typed it wrong anyway. No, I should just call it guide. That's right, because it'll just get the, I'll have guide and control. This is going to be very silly. Now, one thing we do want to do with this control, though, is we do want to have a buffer for it. Because, actually, this is just going to be called buff. It'll get what it is from its namespace, basically. And the reason for that is that, again, in terms of unifying things, I do intend a situation here in which everything points down X, which means that even the upper body control shouldn't have Y up. It should be X up. So, anyway, real quick. Inputs, gonna have to add an input there. Again, kind of have to do this one with code, because you literally can't do it in the UI as far as I know. There's no way to do it. Add adder. Control? Sure, why not? Yeah, I spelled data type wrong. Or rather, I didn't spell it wrong. I typed it wrong. There we go. There's the control input. Then we need anchor, because it needs the same interface, right? And anchor offset. And then we're going to need an output. And it's going to get what control on the other side. Yeah, that's what I would expect to see. Right. Let's grab this one's world matrix. Plug that into control. Take this buffer. I'm going to decompose. I do have code to do this, but this is simple enough. I don't feel like I have to reach for it. And they're going to drive the translate, the rotate, and this is also pretty important. And I did not do it everywhere. And this is probably going to cause a bug later on because of the fact that I didn't connect shear to everything. I'm going to have to go back and fix that and find wherever I screwed that up. But I'm going to make sure to do it correctly this time. Shear. Because if you do not connect translate, rotate, scale, and shear, you are not actually fully you don't have a full matrix. And that can cause unexpected and weird consequences that you didn't anticipate down the line. And I screwed it up, and I'll find that out later when I'll find out where I screwed it up. Anyway, this should all be fine. I can take this guide, rotate it, because that should be its default is X pointing up. And I just need to implement the anchor real quick, and then we'll be done with this single control component. And that's going to work like this. Let's see. I've got anchor and anchor offset. Going to need to do a mult matrix. Going to need to invert. I know I did describe this in an earlier stream, so I'm not really going to describe this one. I just want to get on to the next thing. I think that should probably be okay. But if things are really unclear, which they may well be, like I said, I feel like I haven't been especially well prepared for these componentized streams. Please just pipe up and say I have no idea what you're talking about. You skipped an important bit. This has to be the other way around, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Probably. If it's wrong, I'll find out. This is always the thing that happens with matrices, right? You find out you did it in the wrong order. Decompose that. I really would love to be able to use offset parent matrix here, but I can't because we need to support versions of Maya that don't have it. There we go. Well, we'll find out if I did that wrong. I may have. Yeah, let's get rid of our reference thing here. Now, something is not quite right here, because if this were hooked up properly... Oh, I see. I just don't have the circle pointing in the right direction. Should be pointing down X. There we go. That's the issue. Let's go back to our body plan and pull that in to be our upper body. Right, because I was still calling it left pointer. Gotta fix that. This seems to be doing what it's supposed to do. Let's see. I'm actually going to grab basically all the guides, actually. We're going to have like a nice way of flipping back and forth between looking at the guides and looking at other stuff. But right now, we, you know, like with the locators, we kind of don't. And so I'm just going to do like this. Right, so for the spine, I made something to move them all around. I made something to move them all around that is not working properly. What's going on there, spine? Yeah, I'm moving them all. Oh, I must have selected multiple things at once. Because, in fact, it's fine. I didn't do that for the arm, and I probably should go do it, actually. You know how I have this, like, all? I don't think I have one for the arm. I don't think this is that. Yeah, it's not. Alright, well, that's fine. Because, again, in terms of like flexibility and the ability to just change stuff while you're working on it, and this would become very clear the advantage of this if I had multiple arms and they just all changed at once, right? In this case, there's only one arm. It's probably a little less obvious, but I can just jump back to the arm and add that thing. And jumping back and forth all the time is something that I'm going to be doing a lot. But also, did I leave this arm? Yeah, I did actually. In a state where I was actually setting it up to be mirrored. And I haven't actually put it back. So that's a thing I need to do. 1 second. Actually, you know what? I really don't, actually. Since I already have it in a not mirrored state. Like, it almost doesn't matter where the guides are. Nah, I'm going to put them back. Let's see. This I feel like I just have to do with code because it's so much faster. And a reminder that when I type S, you know, the function S, that's the same thing as PyMel's selected function. Right. n.t.set n.t.get times -1, 1, 1. Let's just put everything back on the other side, and it did. And, oh, except this one. Oh, that's right, because it didn't want to do that because it is mirrored. That's fine. I'll just do that one manually. But then the other thing I need to do is to... Right. I left this in a mirrored state. It should not be... This should be set to left. Wonderful. Did I, like... Because I know exactly what's going on here. But I thought that I fixed it. I am wondering if I actually failed to save this when I should have. Because I know I already fixed this. Sorry guys. Like I said, I have been extremely unprepared for this particular set of things. Oh! I failed to hook something up. I think I see what's going on here. Yeah, this is supposed to be positive x-axis. Yeah, there we go. Now it's correct, of course. I failed to hook up one thing that I was supposed to hook up to make mirroring work properly, which I can do. That'll take like 2 seconds. I've got to make sure that the joint chain here is positive x when it is you know, on left, and negative x when it's on right, which is pretty easy to do. 1 second. I'm just going to put a conditional in there. First term, we're going to say if it's 0, which is equal to left because it's an enum. Do have to find out what the enums here actually, like how many values. So x is 0, 1, 2, 3, negative x is 3. Okay. it didn't. It decided not to display it for me. Where is bone axis? Here it is. I have to tell you, after doing a lot with blueprints, I mean, they have a very different model of things, but also it's kind of spoiled me for the Maya node editor. Yeah, so this should all be fine now. Anyway, the point is, what I was actually here to do was to add a all control, which is just going to be another locator called all, and I'm going to make it rather large and color it the same way that I did previously. I actually want to do that to the shape alone. This will all, the shapes are going to get replaced by these new shapes that Tagore and Brian have written anyway. RGB, give it this color, and parent all the rest of them to it. This isn't even technically a guide. Like, it doesn't feed into anything. It's just sort of a way of helping you move the whole thing around. Where at least things are actually going to look a little different, in when it's released. Each one of the guides will be like a little sphere, and this one will be like a little box. All right. Now our thing has appeared. But here's what we're going to do, actually. We're going to take all of these. And again, here's our flexibility, right? I'm going to drop them all down to the ground without disturbing the hands in any way. And then I'm going to take this one and push it back up so that now that's the thing. I'm actually going to put it over here, I guess, and push these over here. Like I said, there's not really a canonical position for these things, right? They're going to go into whatever they need. They're going to become whatever they need to be for the character. And therefore, I'm going to do the same here. And despite having just moved a whole bunch of stuff around in a bunch of different ways, all of the quote-unquote parenting will continue to work completely normally and exactly as you would expect. Specifically because it is componentized. I swear, like, it's ruined me for other forms of rigging, right? Like, I never want to use a conventional auto rigger again, honestly. So, let's see, we've got that. What's the next thing? Yes, let's bring in our upper body. Oh, I actually already did, as I recall. Yes, we did. Here's our upper body guide, which is going to go up more or less where the spine is. It doesn't actually have to be exactly where the spine... Oh, wait, no, I moved the whole guides themselves. Yes, that's also a thing. I should lock these. I'm not going to do it right this second, but also... Wait, oh, I left that. That's left over. Because I was about to say, like, how come guides have a side? Well, they actually don't. I don't think this is hooked up to anything. I think this is something I just did while I was in the process of, like, figuring out how that was going to work. Because, in fact... if I am not very much mistaken, the left arm components... Yeah, that's the actual one that gets used. So I'll get rid of that other thing at some point. Upper body guides. It's going to make it bigger because apparently it wasn't big enough. Put it up more or less where the... I'll make it slightly different just so it's more visible. It doesn't really matter if they line up perfectly. They might not for a given character, like, whatever makes sense. Let's see, which should mean that our body component is... Alright, that's the components themselves, but our actual buffer and control should be over where they should be. Yes, indeed they are. I'm going to make them larger. And this is one area where sort of the rule of, like, you don't screw around with anything inside, sort of, like, I'm kind of okay with breaking, which is this sort of cosmetic stuff about, like, oh, how big are the circles, And part of the reason for that, I mean, you could do that. You could make inputs for all that stuff, right? But it's completely cosmetic, right? It doesn't actually affect the behavior of the system at all, only what these things look like. And if you were in fact swapping things out for a different kind of arm, you'd probably want them to look different. So I haven't really used the system for this particular purpose, right? I'm just sort of letting people just sort of decide to change these, and that's an area where I'm kind of breaking that rule. And honestly, if it weren't such a pain to maintain the rule, I probably wouldn't break it like this, right? In a system designed to do things this way, it would be incredibly natural to just make that an additional input. But this system is not designed to do that this way, so I'm not going to do that. Because, unfortunately, bowing to practicality is a thing one often must do. All right, here is our upper body control. Currently, it does not do anything, of course. But we are going to use it to drive the spine's anchor. Through the inputs and outputs. Oh, I didn't hook up the output. That's pretty important. Ah, yes, that just goes into control. There we go. Where is the... There are the spine inputs. Right, so here's the outputs. Our control needs to go into anchor, and of which of course screws up everything for a second, but that's okay, because then our input control goes into anchor offset. And if I did this properly, it should all go back where it's supposed to be. Indeed, it did. Yep, there we go. Behaving exactly as one would wish. Okay, so now let's just deal real quick with the question of space switching. Because, as you can see, with the upper body control, it's leaving the arm in place, which actually is what you want a lot of the time, right? Actually, before I do that, because it'll make the issue and the solution much, much clearer, is I'll add the character control. Actually, I might do something slightly different for the character control. Yeah, I am, actually. Here, let me load up this single control. And I'm going to make an offshoot of this, as it were. I'm going to call it double control. This, it's a weird name. It's not a thing with two controls. It's a thing with a double layered control. I'll call it double control for now. I can change the name later if I want to. I just have to make sure that the reference gets redirected to this one. And what I'm going to do here is make two of these. I'm going to make this control and offset control. Actually, no, this would be offset control. Because basically what's going on here, I think this is how it works. Let me just double check my convention here. Rigs can have all kinds of different conventions, but you want to make sure that within a given rig you are always using the same convention, which is something I have not always. Yeah, see, always underscore control. This is what it is, and that doesn't get underscores. This is what it does, right? So you don't want offset control, because control is sort of a specific designation. You want offset underscore control. And as I'm sure, probably a bunch of you are like, oh, I see why you would want this. This is happening because in a lot of circumstances, and this is certainly one of them, you want an additional offset, right? You know, you got your character, you've animated the character even through the scene. Like, I don't know, the character's falling down a ravine, who knows, right? Something where you actually would animate its route potentially, or you've constrained it to a vehicle, like who knows what, right? And then you discover you need an offset from that. It's really useful to have an additional one in there. Sometimes you want 3. I don't know. I think that's maybe overkill, but you know. And once again, I should note, I actually don't like that, right? I don't think that should be a necessity. I don't think that's actually a good way of doing things. But as long as you're going to have a hierarchy as the central concept of how you rig things, you're kind of stuck with it. You kind of have to do it. So it'll be something kind of like that. So here's our character component. Now the character component can theoretically, it's allowed to be, it could be under the right circumstances somewhere other than identity, right? Like identity being like 000 in world space. But we don't want it to be, right? But we do want it to be identity. The circumstances in which it would be anything other than identity would be pretty unusual. There, something like that. And now, because we have inputs and outputs and the whole set of things that would normally go along with this, we can plug that stuff into the upper body control. Because the upper body, of course, should move with the character control. And it's not the only thing that should. Because that's where space switching is going to become pretty important. And that's why I wanted to do this first. Because it, I think, shows the issue that we're going to need our space switches for, just to get the basic, correct operation of the rig pretty quickly. Or pretty clearly. Right, so we need to take our upper body inputs. We need to take our... I forgot something important. If we want this to actually work, this double control must have not the control, but the offset control going into the control output. Because, and the assumption here with this double control, I also put the wrong thing in there for some reason. The assumption here with this double control, what the heck am I doing? Offset control. Thank you. Is that they're sort of one control, right? It's a control and an offset. And as a result, the control doesn't get an output because you don't really want that for anything but, being sort of the initial positioner, and the offset is what you're actually going to be exporting. So this one is going to get its world matrix into control. There's something very nice about even the process that I'm showing here, right? Which is everything I just did, right? Is the sort of thing where if you were building a one-off rig, or you were coding a auto rigging system, right? You could just, either manually do or write some code that did everything that I just did, right? But those things aren't sectioned up, usually, in a very clear way. What I've done here by adhering to this component system, in addition to all of the other advantages that you get from it, is that I can jump into any of these component files, make these changes, but make these changes in an isolated fashion. Because there's an interface, there's a boundary, and anything I want to do inside that boundary is not going to mess anything else up, it is pretty safe for me to go screwing around with stuff. And the example here, this was all quite simple, right? You wouldn't have had an issue with this probably anyway. You might have had something that looked wrong for a moment, you would figure it out, and it would get fixed. But as rigs in complexity goes up, the ability to just jump into a subsection of the rig, as it were, that cannot have any other aspect of the rig interfering with it is invaluable for being able to make rig changes in a sense without fear. Right, there's this thing that I mean, I know I'm ranting a little bit here, but it might be important. There's this thing that that I actually wrote in the introduction to the Contour manual, which Contour is also part of this, right? Is that when I first started using it, is that it took away my fear of rigging, and this is another aspect of that, right? That the fear of rigging is that you descend into this pit, basically, right? Like you're gonna rig some stuff, and you kind of know what you are trying to achieve, but as complexity grows, you become bewildered, right? And it takes a long time to tease out the relationships between things, and things that you do have unintended consequences. And sometimes those unintended consequences, I mean, you've seen me deal with unintended consequences on these few streams, right? But they usually didn't last very long. But you can easily get in a complex rig that doesn't have good organization a case where unintended consequences become things you bang your head against potentially for days, right? You can absolutely go down that rabbit hole and lose huge amounts of time that you don't want to lose dealing with those problems. I mean, in extreme cases, sometimes weeks. Like, that's not unheard of, right? Like, something can be really, really, really unclear. In a way that means that you just can't figure out why it's doing what it's doing. That part of what I want out of Contour, right, which Contour delivers this by meaning that the complexity of deformation goes down a great deal, because Contour just sort of like handles a lot of what you need for a deformation with a clear model, I guess is a good way of putting it, right? You have splines. The splines do predictable things. The things they do are good. You can rely on them to always do those things. They don't have a lot of complexity that is going to jump up and bite you, right?
And there's very few entities involved.
That's right. There's very few entities involved. You just have a spline, and you know what kind of deformation you're going to get. You do have some weights to paint between the splines. There's not a lot of other stuff going on. You can, of course, build other stuff on top, but even that is likely to end up being simpler than you would have to do otherwise. And then this is another aspect of that, where the ability for complexity to become runaway complexity that comes back and bites you, and possibly in really disastrous ways, is significantly, deeply curtailed. And it is, like we've always talked about, right? This is a way in which rigging is programming. Like, this is a way in which part of the reason why this system is so drastically simpler and so drastically more reliable than what we did with TSM3, which took a lot longer to put together. At least in terms of hours, right? Obviously we're sort of doing this in between other things, but is specifically that there's this central concept of not coupling things together, and that concept is so critical in maintaining simplicity of systems. And it is the maintaining of simplicity of systems, maintaining of clarity of systems, that rigging as a vocation, I guess you would say, as a practice, right, never established in any clear way outside of the context of some specific studios that had people who kind of figured some of this stuff out and built their own internal systems that adhered to it, right? And not just studios, right? There's certainly there's well-structured auto rigging systems out there. There's well-structured rigs out there. It's not like nobody has ever done a good rig before, ever, obviously, but there are no clear good practices, right, that are just generally taught or generally understood. And that's very similar to the kind of issues people encounter with programming, right? I mean, and for a good reason, because rigging is programming, as we've, mentioned on many, many occasions. Except, I guess, with programming, while that information is not always adhered to, it does exist. People have put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how to try to structure things in a way that doesn't come back and bite you later. And in rigging, people kind of have, but it's not well distributed information. People don't even really understand that it exists, or that it needs to exist, in a lot of cases, in the majority of cases even, I would say.
I mean, I'd say In the world of programming, the degree to which people actually work in ways that don't come back to bite them is it varies a great deal.
Yes, yes, yes. That's why I was not like, oh no, programmers have it figured out, because actually a lot of the time they don't. But
yeah, and there's a lot of different ideas about it too. Some of which are, conflict a little bit. This is not a solved problem.
No, it's not. But it is one that, at least in the case of programming, the ideas about solving it are sort of out there, and like there's a tradition of them, I guess. And conflicting ideas too, right? It's not like everybody has the same idea about how to solve these problems. In fact, people will get into vicious arguments over it, right?
Sure,
but
very much.
But they're trying. Like, it is understood that this is a problem that, even if people don't always solve it, and sometimes ignore it, and don't, like sometimes just like don't adhere to these ideas, or adhere to these ideas but implement it wrong so that it actually ends up not helping, or like any of the other things that happen. Obviously, there is at least an understanding that this is an important thing, and in rigging there very frequently isn't. I mean, in programming there probably frequently isn't too, but I'm saying, like, I still feel like rigging it's just like there's just so much. There isn't even a tradition of this, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that the tools are somewhat limited. The tools for abstraction that you have, the tools you have for creating patterns.
Right, and indeed, like, the componentized system that we're doing here is essentially a way of attempting to impose that kind of abstraction on something, the Maya node graph, that was never designed for it. All right, so we've got inputs. Actually, put the out. Right, you're not going to give me the other pin, are you? Until I do this, maybe? Yeah. Node editor. Again, it is the difference between the outputs and the inputs that produce the effect. Let's just make sure. Yep, there we go. That is doing precisely as it ought to do. Now let's note something here. Actually, this is maybe a good example of what I'm talking about. The order that I did this in was I went back and fixed the fact that it's not just the character control, but the offset that's passing its data through. I went and fixed that before I hooked this up. But actually, the order didn't matter. I could have hooked this up, been like, oh wait, that's not the right thing, and then gone back and fixed it. Which that, again, not really how this normally works, right? Order usually matters tremendously. Here, it actually really doesn't matter. So let's see. What's next? Yes, that's right. So here you can pretty clearly see the issue. Sometimes you might want this IK to be body relative. Most of the time, though, you probably want it to be character relative. That's normally what you do with hand IK. But in this case, it's not even character relative. And you might say, well, how do I deal with this anchor, right? Which is to say, if you were doing this sort of conventionally with a hierarchy, you might say, oh, well, the hand is actually going to be parented to the character, and then there'll be some space switching that lets you sometimes put it into other space switches, but it'll just move around with the character. But in this case, the whole arm component is actually being anchored to the body. And the hand doesn't take part in that anchoring, right? So the hand currently has nothing controlling it at all. And you can't just go parent it or whatever, right? So the way that's dealt with here is you do have, and this also is, it's space switching, right? But instead of being space switching to undo the hierarchy, it's just space switching with no hierarchy, if you see what I mean. So, or no meaningful hierarchy. I mean, there is, of course, like, if you look under this, it's actually like a whole bunch of hierarchical stuff, but like, a lot of them are identity, right? Your components are just, it's just a transform. It sitting around at 0, it doesn't do anything. And that's just an artifact of like the way we usually structure rigs in Maya. It really doesn't have to be that way. It probably would be better if it wasn't that way, but it is. Now remember all of that stuff we were doing with these spaces, right? We've got the character space, and we've got these various things sort of added underneath the character space. World space, actually, oh, interesting that I added that as an option too. I must have had a different idea about how I wanted to approach this at that time. Right. I remember why I did that. Well, we can ignore it for the moment, and I'll go back and explain that in a minute if we need to. But the main ones that we care about are character space and upper body space, because those are the ones that the hand can be attached to. Here we have character, upper body, and shoulder. Now, shoulder is internal to the arm, right? Because we didn't need to do any like passing of data between components because the arm already knows where the shoulder is. I mean, it's part of the arm, right? So we can sort of ignore that one for the moment. It already works, right? If I were to take this and put it into shoulder space and then go move the spine around, you know, it is going to move with the shoulder. Or in fact, I believe I just rotate it like so. Yeah, it just moves with the shoulder as one would expect. No, it doesn't. Oh, I see. Right. I was like, why is this? Well, it's because I didn't switch the space on the pull vector, right? Yeah. Clearly a bug. Yep. Well, that's easy enough for me to fix. I'm pretty sure I know why that happened. I'm going to go back and fix it in a minute. In fact, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to deliberately add a second arm in here first before I go back and fix it, because that way the fact that I can simultaneously fix two arms in the same scene will be a thing I am visually demonstrating instead of just telling you that I could do that. Anyway. That goes back to character. This is basically the same thing as anchoring. It's actually very identical, and in fact, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that I shouldn't have, and I'm probably not going to change it now because it's just a question of what things are named, and there is some benefit to the clarity here, but anchor is just another space. It's just that it is a space that is sort of reserved for the default. But it works precisely identically to any of these other spaces, and arguably I should have called that like input space or like parent space or something that made it clear that it works identically. But I think I'm going to keep them called anchor. It's not that important that they're named uniformly. I think they are the same thing. This one is just the default one, basically. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I just hook it up the same way. Let me grab this. So we've got the arm, inputs, we have these spaces. We've got character and upper body. I see that I did not do a character offset, and I know why I did not do so. I will essentially it is because I was making the assumption at this time, and I think I am actually going to enforce that assumption, in which case this is fine, which is that the character controls always identity in bind, right? I really think it always should be, actually. So I'm gonna say that's the rule. Let's see. So let me just so the character control is very, very simple, right? Let's get our character outputs, let's get our control, and we just plug it straight in there. That wasn't correct. It means I did something wrong in the arm, doesn't it? Interesting. Let me just check where that put the character space. Oh, it put the character space no. Sorry, I was misreading things. Character space is still identity, which means it shouldn't have changed. Oh! Aha! Yes. This right here, this is why I do actually need it to work like any of the other spaces. Note that this is rotated 90 degrees and there's no offset to put it back. So I'm going to go fix that because it's going to be pretty hard to see how this works if that's not fixed. What have we got here? Let's take a look at our inputs. Yeah. What is my convention here? Should have written these down. I'm gonna list the attributes and see what their actual names are, because of course the Maya attribute editor is going to lie to you about that. Oh, no, sorry. Haha, I'm going to list all the attributes. User defined equals true. Only mine. Not the millions of attributes that Maya has on every single node. Inputs character, inputs upper body offset. Right, so my convention here has been that I've just been doing, it's not upper body underscore offset, it is a separate thing from upper body, and it's therefore upper body offset. I just want to, because you could really do it either way, and I hate that Maya lies to you about what the names of your actual stuff is. It's very, very irritating. There we go. I could go out of my way to try to reorder these, but there's actually no good way to do that. You could do it. You essentially have to recreate them. I'm not a fan. And I don't want to do it, and the order doesn't actually matter, so I'm not going to care. Oh yeah, no, I also have to rig this up to actually do what I want it to do. Character space. Right, this is just some other thing I was looking at. What do I have getting plugged in there? Yes, indeed. I have a decomposed matrix from character, but I need to do this again. Mult matrix. Plug this in to matrix in. And once again, you don't want to show me my actual, here we go, character offset. Oh yeah, that's right. I need to invert that. And then this is what is going to get plugged into the input matrix of my decompose. All right. Right. Okay. So what this should mean is I can now hook this stuff up appropriately. So here's our character outputs going into the left arm. Oh, that's character outputs going into the left arm. Ah, yes, that's right. And then I need the inputs going into character offset. That should put things back where they're supposed to be, and indeed it does. So what this should mean is that now I'm moving these around, and that all works correctly. But in addition, I can move these, that clearly did not work correctly. I probably screwed something up. What did I screw up? Now it is time for me to find out. Ah! I think I see. Well, no. Give me a moment. I'll figure this out. Should be the difference between the inputs and outputs as normal. Oh, whoops. Now, as you can see, it is actually moving in an inverted way. Possibly I screwed up that mult matrix. Very, very likely I got something in the wrong order. Yeah, this is for sure what that's looking like to me. It's just a little unclear, actually. Let me just take a look at what I did there. Actually, I'll take a look without loading up the other one just yet. Here's this character component. Oh, sorry. Character, let's see, we want the left arm character space, which is what is moving around incorrectly. Let's just take a quick look at what's going on there. Yeah, we've got the character. let me just verify that it's working correctly. Yeah, it is. It's working fine for the upper body. So, what did I do here? So when I put the offset as the inverted matrix that is then effectively parented to the movement of the original character matrix, that should be correct. Clearly it's not, or rather something is going wrong here. This being affected. No, it is unaffected by the anchor, and there's nothing before it in the hierarchy. You just got to check on these like, you know, check on the usual suspects, right? You know, I didn't really think it was going to be that, but it could have been. Guides going into the input, offset controls going into the output, exactly as it ought to be. So here, I'm going to do something real quick. This is not, it's just going to be easier for me to diagnose this in context. I'm going to make sure not to save what I'm about to do, because I'm about to go screwing around, you know, in the body plan file with one of these things. Yeah, that's what I thought. It really does need to be inverted. What if I reverse them? Which I'm quite certain is the wrong thing to do, but let's just double check. Now, wait a minute. That can't be... Oh, it can! Yes. I was getting my... Okay. In different contexts, I sometimes work with... different representations of matrices, right? There's the like column major and row major things, and depending on what you do with them, sometimes the order you do them in is different. Indeed, this is the wrong order. In Maya, you don't. This one isn't parented to that one is parented to this one, right? God, I wish the whole world standardized on having matrices work the same way all the time. That's what I want.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, good luck with that one. But it's always that, right? It's always you did something in the wrong order. I also really, really wish, and this is of course a math thing from long, long ago, right? I really wish they didn't call it multiplication, because it's not.
Call what multiplication?
Matrix multiplication.
It absolutely is.
I feel like one of the things that you just assume about multiplication is that it's commutative.
Okay, that's not
It's
something
not.
you assume about.
Right.
That's
All
not.
right. I feel like it is.
Multiplication.
Yeah.
It's just you're only used to one. So yeah, you're only used to multiplication on sort of the real numbers. So you think that, but actually that is not a property,
right.
Necessarily a property of multiplication.
I mean, but essentially matrix multiplication amounts to a whole bunch of dot products, right?
I mean, it's an operation of its own.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, regardless of what it amounts to or whatever, it is an operation of its own. But multiplication is definable outside of what's being multiplied. There's like a whole field called abstract algebra.
Yeah. I'm sure it does actually make sense, right? It always throws me for a loop. All right, so this is working. This is working. Let's see. Yes, now the upper body. One thing I think is maybe worth saying here is all of this stuff with like getting the inputs out of the hierarchy, and you've got these transform nodes with all this data spread all over the place. This is all a artifact of the fact that we're trying to make Maya do something Maya doesn't really do, right? So much of the things that are unclear about this, probably watching me do it, where I'm, doing a whole bunch of, you know, I know there's this input and this output, and they get sort of hooked together in a way that's like sort of confusing, right? You know, I'm sure this is all actually pretty confusing. The concepts that underlie it actually really aren't. The concepts that underlie it are actually very clear. Unfortunately, Maya provides no good view into those concepts because they're not concepts that are native to Maya. So all of this crap that we're doing, like you could imagine a node graph that was designed to represent these components and inputs and outputs. And in fact, people have made node graphs that sort of sit on top of Maya and do exactly that. Like, there's actually a rigging tool that's basically its purpose, right? I forget what it's called, but it's always kind of frustrating because all of the stuff that I'm showing here should have so much more clarity. But we got to do it sort of this weird backwards way through Maya's node graph, which was never designed to have any kind of abstraction like this, and has no real concept of like, well, that's actually not true. There are the what do they call them? I forget what they're called. What are they? They've seen.
I forget the name too.
Assets,
but nobody really uses them.
Nobody uses.
I think assets. I think you are correct.
Yeah, nobody uses them, and as a result, I've been very reluctant to use them because I kind of feel like they could stop working at any time. You know, like
yeah.
And so I'm doing things this way, but it's ugly, right? It obscures the actually quite doing things the clear way actually is less clear, if you see what I mean, in the context of Maya's UI. Even though the organization of this actually adds a lot of clarity, but visually it doesn't, right?
Visually it doesn't. Yeah, it would be nice to have. I mean, it's funny. We've talked about this a little bit about what better tools for abstraction and rigging would be like.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have some, definitely.
It absolutely would. Well, and as I've said before, right, you know, Control Rig, I don't think Control Rig is perfect, but I think Control Rig offers a vastly superior, like in Control Rig, if I was doing this, these components could literally be, like, just nodes, basically, functions that I made that have inputs and outputs that you could just hook them up together at a higher level because, you know, blueprints are a real programming language. It would be vastly clearer what's actually going on. Let's see. What was I doing? Right. I am driving and this is what I'm talking about. It's like, this should have been just like this, right? This should have taken this last half hour. Of course, I ranted a bunch during that time, so it's my own fault too. But this should have all taken like 5 minutes. Where was I? And also, I just get lost in the bewildering group of things too, right? You know, I just have to take a moment to reorient myself. This is not a great way of doing things. I mean, it is because it's better than other ways, but like this way of interacting with these systems, you know, like the UI with which you interact with them, or perhaps UI is not even the right word, right? You know, the interface in more than just the visual sense that you interact with them in is just very awkward. All right, where were we? Yes, we need left arm inputs. We've done character offset. We need upper body and upper body offset, which I believe we have not done yet. Let me just double check on that. Yeah, we have not. Or actually, let me just double check on that because, well, actually I can see that we haven't because it would be showing me these connections if we had. Outputs go... Yes. And... Control, right, yeah, this is going to go into upper body offset. Okay, so this should now, so I'm moving the upper body around. If I were to switch this to upper body, then indeed it is responding correctly to the movement of the upper body. That is a space switch that works. Which means we now have the hand, and of course, the vast majority of the time, you're going to have this in character mode. You're going to move the upper body around and leave the IK hands in place, and you're going to move the character around and move the, you know, move everything around. I don't really. Some people in rigs do have a world version that's even above this, where it's like, no, really, the actual world space. I actually don't do that. I think it's probably a bad idea a lot of the time, because the world, because you always want an escape hatch. That's kind of why we have like the double controls here. We always want an escape hatch. We always want something that allows us to say, we need to reposition this entire character in the scene relatively easily, right? And if you have a thing where your controls can truly be in world, you cannot do that. Well, I mean, you can. You have to make a bunch of additional constraints or something, right? You know, you need to sort of, it's not simple, right? And I think you just shouldn't have that option, right? I don't think it benefits you at all. Now, of course, you know, again, I'm going to say this sort of thing, right? In an ephemeral system, this doesn't matter, right? You be whatever space you want. There's no canonical space. You know, you can move anything around anyway that's appropriate. But we are not doing that, and therefore we have to take certain sorts of precautions that and so much of rigging, by the way, is about this. And it used to be even worse, right? I mean, I've seen rigs, I've used rigs where every single control had like 3 different gimbal controls because people were so terrified of the consequences of gimbal lock. And that sort of receded somewhat as people have tended to come more to the pose to pose with some breakdowns method, where even if you do have some, like, you know, you do kind of get yourself in a gimbal lock, paint yourself into a gimbal lock corner, you have enough poses that you kind of like cheat yourself out of it a little bit, right? But you know, certainly that is a thing that used to exist, and it still does in some places. And just in both rigging and animation, one of the things I find so frustrating is the protectiveness. The need to spend a lot of effort shielding yourself from potential future consequences, which may or may not ever actually occur. Because if they do, they're so very difficult to deal with. And part of the impetus for everything we're doing is that shouldn't be the case. It should be okay to be like, oh, I had this thing in world space, but, you know, I can do whatever I want to it in whatever space I want now, right? To not spend all of this effort future-proofing yourself against trying to avoid getting painted into a corner. I honestly think that when you put both rigging and animation and the whole set of animation technologies, the whole thing, the, as it were, technology stack, I mean, not in the usual sense, right? Not the same way that web programmers talk about that, but, you know, like we're spending like 50% extra effort or something just to shield ourselves from the consequences that we're afraid of. And, you know, doing stuff out of fear as opposed to practicality is not actually a great plan if you can avoid it, right? Except in this case, fear is practical, because if you do end up in that position, you really are kind of screwed. Anyway, it is now 6:30, so, you know, I kind of had this idea, and clearly this was very silly of me, where I was like, you know, we're not that far away from having this whole thing together. You know, we'll get this other arm in, and then I'll start putting the legs in, and I'll show you how to hook up those bits between the spine and the legs. Clearly I was very wrong about how much time this was going to take and how much, like, hooking stuff up was going to happen. And therefore, I'm afraid that will have to occur next time. I may go in and sort of, because I think this is, like, you've seen me add stuff, right? I think it's fine for me to go ahead and add the other arm and the 2 legs and you know, set up some of this basic stuff before we do that, so that you know, I'll spend less time just setting stuff up on stream, and we can get right to it and hopefully actually rig a character next time, because we really are very close, right? And I do think that I explained some stuff that's kind of important this time, and, you know, it was maybe worth it. But yeah, I was apparently, you know, drastically wrong about what we were going to get to today. But you know, we are very close. I do expect us to be doing that next time. You know, if you still believe a single thing I say about how long anything takes. So yeah, is there anything else we wanted to mention to Gore before we sign off?
No, I think we're pretty good. I think we're pretty good at this point.
Yeah, so unfortunately next time, next Tuesday, we will not have a stream, because we are going to be going to an event in Boston. So that would happen at the same time. So it'll be the week after that, and then hopefully we'll wrap all this up and have a fully working system. And at that point, even because it doesn't really change how the system behaves, and you don't really need to see me add those because it's just a matter of changing the shapes of some things. It'll probably have like the shapes that Tagore and Brian have been working on that'll be a lot nicer than these locators. So that'll be nice.
Yeah. I'm excited to actually ship this.
Yeah.
We're getting there. I can see it coming.
Yeah.
It's going to mark our 1.1 release. I think it will make Contour useful for a lot more people.
Yeah, I absolutely do think so. I mean, that is one thing that we've always sort of known, which is our first release was mostly
it was kind of targeted a little bit more at maybe larger studios.
Right.
A lot of rigging resources, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically there's that, but also part of the reason for that is that it's always good to release something useful, even if you know that you're going to need to add more features in the future, right?
Sure.
And so now we're getting.
I don't know. We might have rushed Contour out the door. I mean, when we. It's kind of a joke. It was a long time coming.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it was good to get it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that it'll be. I think it's an important addition, and obviously we're going to need to add a lot more body plans. But
yes, for sure.
The biped is a good start.
Yes, exactly. Biped's a start. Probably the very next thing after that is going to be, and this will be quite quick to add actually, because it's literally just an alternate body plan. A version of this that drives conventional Maya joints.
Right.
So that game engines, right? Because otherwise why would you even do that? As far as I'm concerned, but for game engines, yeah, you kind of have to, right?
Sure.
So, and that's going to be quite easy to do actually. And then
more
body plans.
A quadruped would be good.
Quadruped is going to be one of the next things.
A tail would be good.
Yep, tail, right? Exactly. Plenty of characters have tails.
Yep.
There's going to be.
I guess with wings, there's just so many different ways of doing wings.
Oh, geez, yeah, it's hard. We actually looked into that with Thread Machine at one point. It's really, really hard to auto rig for wings because the what you need for a given wing varies so tremendously, right?
Right. Yeah, there isn't. There is kind of a standard biped. There isn't really a standard wing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, so thanks for showing up. Please like and subscribe. And we won't be back next week, but we will be back the week after. And I hope we'll see you all there. Thanks. Bye.
Alrighty. Thank you. Bye-bye.